Well, yeah. So you mentioned it was kind of towards the second half of the season. It sounds like it might have been the line that contributed, but it almost looked like two different Seattle offenses in Russell Wilson's. I mean, for those first 8 games, they were leading the NFL with 34.25 points per game. The second half, they were bottom 10 with just 23.75 points per game. Russell had 28 touchdowns in that first 8 contests to then just 12 in the back 8. He went from the quarterback 2 in fantasy all the way down to quarterback 15. So do you think that really was significant, like just the line was the biggest cause for that? Is there other reasons there was such a drastic difference between the first half and second half?
Well, part of it was, so they played the Rams, twice and then 3 times if you include the playoffs and in the final 9 games. And so the Rams, just going back to, the Rams have been the biggest thorn in Seattle's side from a defensive standpoint ever since Russell got there in 2012. I mean, you can go look at Russell's stats. He has had a lot of bad games against the Rams. They just, with Aaron Donald and that line, it's just always been a really tough matchup for them. Then they played the Cardinals in there. They played the 49ers. The division opponents just, I think know how to play them a little bit better. The 49ers obviously last year had the defensive coordinator was a guy from Seattle staff. He knew exactly what the Seahawks are doing. So, a little bit of it was that, they played a game in Washington on a bad field that they led the whole way. So they sort of just sat on the ball, once they got a lead, and obviously Washington almost came back, but they took the big lead early and sort of just sat on the ball. So, there were some things that kind of made the statistics, I think, and the Jets game, they led 30-3 at halftime and they never ran the ball. Or never threw the ball again in the second half. So there were some things like that I think impacted the statistics a little bit. But as I mentioned earlier, when they had that spate of turnovers, they wanted to get a little bit more conservative with their play calls for sure. They felt like the defense was getting better. That was the other thing that played into it. Once Jamal Adams got healthy, once they traded for Carlos Dunlap, they felt like the defense was getting better. And so they could go back to a little bit more of that let's win with the defense and ball control game. Instead of having to air it out as much as they did. Some of the airing it out early was simply because they kept playing these shootout games. They were going down to they had 3 games essentially. I think 3 of the first 5 games went down to essentially the final minute. The New England, Dallas, and Minnesota games that all just went, so they were having to do whatever it took to keep scoring in those games. In the second half of the year, they had a few games they didn't have to do, or a game against the Giants where they just, were hideous from the start, just couldn't do anything. So certainly I wouldn't argue that the offense played as well in the second half of the year, but I really don't think it was this quantum like, oh, we just don't want to throw the ball anymore. I just think a lot of it was circumstantial stuff that happened. And but certainly, I think the playoff game in particular, exposed some things about their offense and how it works that made them want to make the change and bring in Shane Waldron. And I think they realized there's some, to get back to the Super Bowl, there's some teams you're going to have to beat that have really good defenses. And you're going to have to be a really well-rounded offense that can do a lot of different things that can't be really easily defended. And I think that's what they felt like happened was once teams really started kind of ganged up the 2 deep zone, tried to keep everything underneath, that the Seahawks weren't real good at doing the throw underneath stuff. And so that's what they want to get better at for sure. Whether they want to do more of it, I don't know if they necessarily want to do it more. I think they just want to do it better. They just want to be able to, if teams are going to do that, like I said, in the Rams game, you can go back and look. It wasn't like they didn't try to throw short and get the ball out of Russell's hands quickly. The big play in the game was a play where they tried to get the ball out of Russell's hands quickly, and Darius Williams for the Rams picked it off and ran it back for a pick 6. That was just your basic wide receiver screen kind of thing, which is the kind of thing which can work well and maybe get you 20 easy cheap yards. They didn't do a lot of that stuff real well down the stretch last year, and that's what they need. That's what they want from Shane Waldron, is to incorporate some of those elements of the Rams offense where they do it well. The Rams aren't throwing it deep all the time. They do a lot of just kind of short stuff where they get the ball to guys in space and they make plays. They get yards that way. And that's an aspect of it the Seahawks really want to incorporate for sure.
Absolutely. And how has that kind of install been? Like, how has this marriage, obviously Russell's such a good quarterback. He'll probably be good in any system that you put him in. But how has that marriage between the OC and Russell Wilson been so far? Does it look like they're improving in that intermediate range? Does it look like this is going to be a good fit between the two?
I mean, this early in training camp, it's really hard to make big judgments of that. We've only seen them 2 days in pads and all of that. Certainly we've seen them do it. So, certainly there's some things they're doing that way that you can tell they are trying to do that. Players have talked openly about the tempo part in particular, that, that's a really big emphasis, and they are working on that a lot. I'm not going to say after watching 2 padded practices whether they're better at any of this. I think we need to wait a while to say that, but certainly they are trying to do these things, and we'll see if they can do them once we get into the season.
Absolutely. I always like to too, when we do these writers with the beat interviews, look at the Vegas lines that they've set for them and see if you think these are fair projections. And Russell's set right now at 4,250 and a half yards and 33 and a half touchdowns. Do you think those are reasonable? Do you think he hits the overs or the unders on those?
Yeah, the touchdowns. I mean, and again, it's funny because for all the talk about their offense last year, Russell set a franchise record career high with 40 touchdowns. They set a franchise record for points in a season without getting a single defensive or special teams touchdown for the first time in their history. So, they did score a lot of points, but they just didn't do it at the right times down the stretch, especially in the playoff game, essentially. I would take the over on the touchdowns. I think it's reasonable to think he's got a chance to, he's bettered that mark a few times here. I don't have his numbers right in front of me. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but he's definitely hit, above that number, I think at least 3 times in his career, including last year with 40. The 4250 is a little, that would be right at about the cusp of what I would think. So that's a well set line for sure. I probably take the under on that. Again, the way Pete Carroll envisions this is it's an offense that, you throw to get into the end zone, but you might run to get down there kind of thing. I don't know that, I think ideally they wouldn't throw it that much for the yards. They would do some things to set up some things, but for sure the big plays in the passing game to get the touchdown. So I would probably take the over on the touchdowns, but the under on the yards.
I like it. Yeah. And I just looked it up. He's been over that touchdown mark in 3 of the last 4 seasons. So you're stirring an extra game for him too. I love that mark. I think 33 and a half.
Yeah, that's true. I totally forgot about that aspect of it. Yeah. I throw in the 17th game for sure.
Exactly. I'm with you. I think that's an easy one to hammer right there. 33 and a half touchdowns for him. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.